Hello and welcome to Autoinform online magazine. In this edition of Frank's Toolbox, we're going to take a look at fuel filtration. Now, primarily we're dealing with diesel and primarily with common rail diesel, where fuel contamination is a really serious issue. For several reasons. One is that it will cause potential damage to vehicle components, and that's part of the diagnostic process, and should be taken into account as early as possible an opportunity before you start physical testing, and that's where this particular feature is being focused. You could rightly argue that your process of investigation should begin with examination of the fuel tank and its contents, and really it's very difficult not to support that argument. However, gaining access to the fuel tank can be time consuming, potentially maybe unnecessary. So let's try and develop a middle of the road approach that we might consider. In this toolbox, we'd like to introduce what in effect is an additional filter. The system already has pre-filtering in the tank. It will have its main line filter, its particulate filter, which is part of the design feature of the vehicle. This particular product is designed as an additional filter. It can be fitted and is intended to be fitted permanently to the vehicle. So I'd suggest that you might consider fitting one of these where there has been perhaps an in-tank pump failure, or perhaps some contamination which has been dealt with thoroughly. In other words, the tank's been taken off, steam cleaned, the lines flushed, new components fitted perhaps, new filtration, where you might want to belts and braces ensure that for the possibility of any remaining debris contamination, you might want to consider applying this filter. It has quite a powerful magnetic base which will attract any iron-based particulates. It also then has a very fine brass filtration element in the body, and also has another very useful feature. It has a clear perspex housing. We can literally observe what's flowing through this actual filtering element. What we've done also is, having identified the benefits of having this as an additional filter, is building it back on our toolkit, because you may recall one of the features that we looked at some time ago was the gauge, which we've developed and designed over a number of years, which has in effect its own sight block for the very purpose of monitoring and watching fuel flow, cavitation, pockets of air, etc. But now, because we've adapted it with the same fittings, we can now protect the gauge. One consideration we've always discussed in the training programs is that by connecting a gauge to a system which may have foreign material in the fuel, it's contaminated, you effectively contaminate the gauge, therefore potentially passing that contamination on to other vehicles. What we're suggesting now is that we fit this to a vehicle where we do not know of the fuel quality, and indeed, why not fit it at all times? Protect the gauge before we discover there is a problem. We can now fit that in series with the fuel priming system, and or then supply the customer with that as a separate additional filtration for his vehicle protection, and that then becomes in effect a serviceable item. So the use of this type of filter really is in two parts: extra protection for the vehicle, additional protection for the gauge, and because these are standard threaded fittings, we can actually change these. These are obviously the fittings we use for our gauges and adapters. They could be fitted with ferrule fittings for hose adapters into rubber, or any type of particular adapter suitable for virtually any vehicle manufacturer. Of course then it becomes in itself a diagnostic tool in the vehicle. You can watch fuel flow, you can examine the contents of the fuel, and also where there has been contamination, you can then actually open the filter housing and examine, because you've got a magnetic base there, cut the housing open and actually examine the content of any contamination that may be present. I hope you found the introduction of this new component of some benefit. We certainly have, both diagnostically and as additional protection for our gauges, and that brings this particular edition of Frank's Toolbox to a conclusion. I'd like to thank you for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you in the next edition.